most of the people here tonight have won an Olympic medal and a bronze star. So that's not very special, even though Dr. Esselstyn has won an Olympic medal and a bronze star. I think we've all been there. I think we can all agree that most of us here on the call have at least one of those.
Yeah.
What's exciting for us tonight is, so as we look at plant-based eating and what it does for your health, we have someone who really does some of the seminal work in that field. It's like if you were going to have a discussion of quantum physics and we're like, oh, you know who might be good for that? Einstein. Einstein might be good if we could get Einstein. Dr. Esselstyn is the Einstein of this plant-based nutritional field. He is a former surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic. He's been working, and his revelations on plant-based eating and what it does to, it's the only reason why I know the word endothelial cells, is remarkable. So without further ado, I will give it to our Einstein, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who's here tonight. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. We couldn't be more honored that you were doing.
Sure. Blink and black. Yep.
All right, can you all see the slide all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, Tracy? Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Do I use this one?
Yep.
Okay. Well, John, thank you for those kind words. It's always exciting when we're working on a program where the audience really are kindred spirits. It makes our job a lot easier, but I would like to just sort of go over some of the basics, review the fundamentals, and see if we really can't arrive at an answer to why we should totally vanquish cardiovascular disease. Now, we're going to work out the technology here of this in a moment. Suppose you were a cardiac surgeon and you decided to hang out your shingle, either in rural China, the Papua Highlands, the Tarahumara in northern Mexico, Central Africa, or the Okinawa. Forget it. You better plan on selling pencils. Why? Cardiovascular disease is practically non-existent in these cultures. And it's been that way for 100 years, and we've known it for 100 years. Why does that happen? Because they're thriving on whole food, plant-based nutrition without oil or a minimum of oil. Now, it's interesting that when we look at the autopsy results of our GIs who died in Korea, at an average age of 20, 80% of those young men already had gross evidence of coronary disease that you could see without a microscope, but not enough for their cardiac events yet. So that study was then repeated, as you can see on this next slide, in 1999, this time looking at young women and men who had died of accidents, homicides, and suicides. And now, in 1999, the disease is ubiquitous. Everybody, you graduate from high school in this country and you get a diploma, and you also get the benefits of early coronary artery disease. Not a good plan. Now, for those of you who are looking at this present slide, if you're thinking that the artery on your right is diseased, you are paying attention. Yes. And you're probably saying, when that small opening finally closes off, there'll be a heart attack. Well, interestingly enough, probably not. Only about 10% of heart attacks come from looking at something this diseased. Yes, sure enough, this patient is going to have angina, is going to have some shortness of breath, but it has taken so long for this to form that the downstream heart muscle, which is deprived of its due of oxygen and nutrients, has been developing often little tiny collaterals. And those little collaterals that go around this blockage, although they're not enough to make heart function normal there, they are enough to sustain downstream cardiac viability, even when that small opening closes off. Now let's turn to the left. Here we have the normal artery. And even those of you in the back of the room, if you look closely, you can see that delicate, tiny little one single cell layer thick innermost lining of the artery called the endothelium, about which we're going to have more to say in a moment. Now, if you are eating a milkshake, a cheeseburger, or pizza, the first thing that happens is that things begin to get sticky, sticky, sticky. We're going to come back to this in a moment, if Brian can help me. But first we're going to go ahead, and this makes it a little bit confusing because this is a slide from Harvard. Now, I know, even though I went to Yale, we do like to hit Harvard now and then. Now, if you look to orient you, in the blue is where the blood is flowing. Just below the blue is that single layer of cells, the endothelial cells, which separate flowing blood from the artery wall. Now, to make sense out of all this, let's do this together. Let's go to the left upper corner of this slide, and you will see those orange molecules of your LDL cholesterol, which, because of the way you've been eating, has now been oxidized. And look what happens. Because things have gotten so sticky, those LDL cholesterol molecules bump up against the endothelial layer, identify a crack, a fissure, or an opening, and migrate into the subendothelial space, where Peter Libby from Harvard has now changed them from orange to yellow because they have been oxidized. And the subendothelial space does not like these small, hard, dense, oxidized LDL cholesterol particles and calls upon the SWAT team, which are usually our white blood cells. But here, Peter Libby of Harvard has painted them blue in honor of Yale, which we like. And now that SWAT team is in the subendothelial space doing its job of, as it goes from left to right, gobbling up, gobbling up, gobbling up progressively all these small, hard, dense LDL cholesterol molecules until we get all the way over to the right. When we do in medicine what we do so often, we change the name. Now it's called the foam cell. But the foam cell has earned the title of truly the Darth Vader of this sequence of events. Why? Because the foam cell is capable of manufacturing these nasty, nasty chemical substances that we call metalloproteinases, like stromelicin, elastase, collagenase, and myeloperoxidase. But what do they do that is so bad? Let's go back to the preceding slide, if Brian can make the magic happen. And we'll go back to there we go. And what happens with the metalloproteinases, you look at the left-hand side of this slide, and the first figure, A, on the upper part of that plaque, the cap over the plaque has become progressively thinned out because of the metalloproteinases made by this foam cell. And now what you see on that figure on the left, there's a little crack in the top. That means that you have ruptured your plaque. And what happens now is there is the extravasation of plaque content into the flowing blood, which activates our platelets, our clotting factors, and suddenly we now go to the middle figure B, and a clot has started to form. And that clot is in and of itself self-propagating. And in a matter of further minutes, it has gone all the way over to the figure in C on the right. Look, the clot is completely occluding the artery, and all the downstream heart muscle is now deprived of its oxygen and nutrients, and it starts to die. And that's 90% of your heart attacks. Okay. Now, if I do my job correctly this evening, every one of you, and hopefully your friends and relatives, will be able to make themselves heart attack proof. How are you going to do that? You're not going to do it with a pill. You're not going to do it with a stent. You're not going to do it with an operation. You're going to do it by changing your biochemistry. How are you going to change your biochemistry? By changing your diet when you are eating whole food, plant-based nutrition. This entire cascade of events that I've just described is going to be halted and reversed. You're not going to oxidize your LDL cholesterol. it is not going to migrate across the endothelium into the subendothelial space. There will be no SWAT team. There will be no appearance of the foam cell. There will be no metalloproteinases from the foam cell. If the foam cell is not active, you will not thin out the cap over your plaque. It will not rupture. You will actually strengthen the cap over your plaque. If you strengthen the cap over your plaque, it cannot rupture. If it cannot rupture, you have made yourself heart attack proof. Now, let's try the next one. I want to spend a little bit more time on the endothelial cell. It was up until 1980 that we used to think of the endothelial cells as nothing more than these cute little red bricks that were lining our wonderful artery pipes. That all changed in 1980 when Dr. Furchtgott was taking the largest blood vessel in the rodent, the aorta. And he would do this sort of elliptical spiral staircase cut on it right through the endothelium, immerse it in a bath of saline, and it would constrict. But one day, no cut on the aorta, no injury to the endothelium. Furchtgott immersed it in the saline, boom, it dilated. Did it again, it dilated. Now the race was on globally. What was the EDRF that Dr. Furchtgott had discovered? Endothelial derived relaxation factor. Thank heavens that term was with us only 8 years when it was Dr. Furchtgott, Dr. Murad, and Dr. Luignaro who discovered that the EDRF was a gas, nitric oxide. And for that, they got the Nobel Prize in 1998. Now, what is it about nitric oxide that makes it worthy of a Nobel Prize? Well, it has a number of absolutely remarkable functions. Nitric oxide will keep all the cellular elements within our bloodstream flowing smoothly like Teflon rather than Velcro. It keeps things from getting sticky. Number two, nitric oxide is the strongest blood vessel dilator in the body. When you climb stairs, the arteries to your heart, to your legs, they widen, they dilate nitric oxide. Number three, nitric oxide will protect the wall of the artery from becoming thick and stiff or inflamed, protect us from getting high blood pressure or hypertension. Number four is the absolute key. A safe and normal amount of nitric oxide will protect us all from ever developing any blockages or plaque. So literally, everybody on the planet, whether they're from London, Berlin, Chicago, New York, or Greenwich, or Cleveland, if they have cardiovascular disease, it is because by now, in the preceding decades, they have so sufficiently trashed, injured, compromised, and turned their endothelial system into an absolute train wreck. They no longer have enough nitric oxide to protect themselves from making blockages and plaque. However, the good news is this is not a malignancy. This is a completely benign foodborne illness. And if you can get to the patient and make them understand that never, never, ever, never again are they to have passed through their lips a single morsel that is going to further injure an already train-wrecked endothelium, then the endothelium begins to recover, makes enough nitric oxide so we can halt disease progression. And we often see elements of disease reversal. So I usually have a few more things to say about endothelial cells, but because of time, well, let's go one more. There's a wonderful study by Robert Vogel, who was chairman of cardiology at the University of Maryland, who took a group of healthy young subjects to a certain fast food restaurant, which is characterized by arches, which are golden. Now, half of that group had the cornflakes, and they had the brachial artery tourniquet test, which is a measure for endothelial function producing nitric oxide. And then the other half of the group had the hash browns and sausage. Well, after the cornflakes, their brachial artery tourniquet test for nitric oxide was normal. 120 minutes after they ate the hash browns and sausage, they couldn't dilate the artery. That single meal had so trashed, so injured their endothelial capacity to make nitric oxide, they couldn't dilate the artery. But following them into the late afternoon and early evening, they began to recover. But you and I know, the next morning for breakfast, it'll be scrambled eggs and bacon. Lunchtime, how about cold cuts, mayonnaise, and white bread? And how about supper time? Well, we'll have a baked potato with sour cream, vegetable soaked in butter, lamb chops, ranch dressing on the salad, ice cream for dessert. Here in the good old USA, absolutely all day long, we absolutely are trashing and injuring our endothelial production of nitric oxide. Now let's go where the rubber hits the road. I want to share with you both of the studies that I've done on patients who were severely ill with heart disease. The first was a small study because I still was an active surgeon and had my surgical responsibilities. About these 24 folks, I had nothing against women. It was just the way the patients were sent to me. They all had severe triple vessel coronary disease. And the whole idea here was to see if I could somehow persuade them to give up their Western diet and begin to eat whole food, plant-based nutrition. Now, the foods that we want them to give up, and I want you to understand, these are the foods that every time they pass your lips, you injure the endothelial cells. Not a drop of oil, olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil, oil in a cracker, oil in a piece of bread, oil in a salad dressing. Oil injures endothelial cells. And for those who have questions about that, I wrote a paper that was published in the scientific journal, the International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention in 2019. The title of it was, Is Oil Healthy? And I went over reviewed all the animal studies and the human studies showing how oil injures endothelial cells. And also avoiding meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey, and eggs, and avoiding sugar and dairy, the milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, and yogurt. I'm not a great fan for sugary foods like cakes, pies, cookies, stevia, agave, excesses of maple syrup, molasses, or honey. I like to avoid peanuts, peanut butter, nut butters, cashew sauce, avocado. And I don't like coffee with caffeine. Decaf, yes, but not coffee with caffeine. All right, now what are you going to eat? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, for those of you who are nervous about what I said about oil, here is a peer-reviewed scientific study. Olive, soybean, and palm oil intake have a similar acute detrimental effect over the endothelial function in healthy young subjects. Now, this is some interesting work for those who involved with keto diets or any of those diets which require meat. This is the work of Stanley Hazen from our institution. And what you see up there are the foods of animal origin eaten by those who are omnivores. And what Stan did, he was measuring the bacteria in the microbiome that when they metabolized the lecithin and carnitine, which are the molecules found in these animal products, omnivores will produce TMA, trimethylamine, which is rapidly oxidized in your liver to trimethylamine oxide. And that happens to be very injurious to your blood vessels. Here's the schematic. Lecithin and carnitine in the animal foods, gut bacteria in the omnivore capable of converting lecithin and carnitine into TMAO, which will injure your blood vessels. But the exciting thing that Stan found, if he took somebody who was totally plant-based, gave them a lamb chop, measured their blood for TMAO, not there. Yes, if you continue to eat day after day the lamb chop, you will convert. But the whole point here to be made is the fact that if you are totally plant-based, you are protected from the blood vessel injury from TMAO. So these folks are going to eat whole grains for their cereal, bread, pasta, rolls, and bagels. 101 different types of legumes, lentils, and beans, all these marvelous red, yellow, and green leafy vegetables, and some fruit. Now, I want to share with you, and this is probably a very important part of this presentation, I want to share with you, when did I start? Okay. I want to share with you something that we've just introduced in the last 9 years. And by now you understand, and you're going to hear me say this several times, because much as I respect your high degree of intelligence, this is the whole point of this presentation, to have you understand that where this disease has its inception, when we injure the endothelial cell, we lose out because it can no longer make enough nitric oxide. Now, we almost feel like nature threw us a curveball here, because the endothelial production of nitric oxide is age related. You never heard of a heart attack in a 8-year-old boy or girl. They have nitric oxide coming out of their ears, even though they've already started eating this horrible Western diet. But even if you are beautifully healthy at age 50, you no longer have, let's say you've lost 50% of the endothelial production of nitric oxide you had when you were 25. When you're over 80, you've lost 70%. So we need to somehow goose up that endothelial system a little bit, and at the same time, take advantage of the new research in the last 12 or 14 years that has shown us that in humans, there is an alternate pathway for making nitric oxide. Here we go. If I can convince you if you have heart disease, to imagine shrinking your head to a size that can crawl into your coronary artery, you will see that blockage is an absolute cauldron of oxidative inflammation. But don't go down to the health food store and buy a jug of pills that says antioxidant, because it doesn't work and it's going to be harmful. I need you to get your antioxidants from food. Fair enough. What food? Food that is high in what we call ORAC value, ORAC, oxygen radical absorptive capacity. So if you're having raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries for your morning oat cereal, that's terrific. However, nothing can trump the antioxidant value of a green leafy vegetable, which I need you to chew, not smoothies or juicing. I need you to chew a green leafy vegetable roughly the size of half of your fist. I need it 6 times a day if you're a heart patient. After you have first boiled it in water, 5.5 to 6 minutes, or steam, till it's nice and tender. And then you must anoint it with several drops of a delightful balsamic or rice vinegar. Why? Because research has shown that the acetic acid from those vinegars can help to restore the nitric oxide synthase enzyme contained within the endothelial cell that is responsible for making nitric oxide. So you're going to have this alongside your breakfast cereal, again as a mid-morning snack, again with your lunch and sandwich. That's 3, mid-afternoon 4, dinner time 5, and of course I adore it when you have that evening snack at kale, number 6. Now, the second benefit, when you're chewing the green, it helps to restore the capacity of your bone marrow to once again make the endothelial progenitor cells, which will replace our senescent, injured, worn out endothelial cells. And the third benefit, and this is the absolute key, the third benefit from chewing the greens is that while you're chewing the green, you are chewing a green nitrate, which is going to mix with the facultative anaerobic bacteria that reside in the crypts and grooves of your tongue. Those bacteria will reduce that green nitrate in your mouth to a green nitrite. Now, when you swallow the nitrite, it is your own gastric acid, which further reduces the nitrite to more nitric oxide, which can now enter your nitric oxide pool. So think about it. For minimal expense, with no hideous side effect, literally, dawn to dusk, morning to night, all day long, you are absolutely restoring nitric oxide, the very molecule, the deficiency of which gave you this disease in the first place. Now, there's a caveat. Toothpaste with fluoride, public drinking water with fluoride, and mouthwash will injure the beneficial bacteria in your mouth. And we'd like patients to avoid antacids, because antacids will reduce your gastric acidity and you will be unable to reduce the nitrite to more nitric oxide. Now, oh yeah, with apologies to Leonardo da Vinci, no oil. All right, well, I want to share with you just a couple of angiograms of some of this original group. These were all reviewed in triplicate in the Cleveland Clinic Angiography Core Laboratory by senior technicians that do this all day long for national trials. So when I tell you a percentage of reversal, I know it's accurate. This happens to be a 67-year-old retired pediatrician. You're looking at the left anterior coronary artery, left anterior descending. And from the arrow on the left to the arrow on the right, that is a 10% improvement. A little easier to see on this next, where you're looking at the circumflex artery to the back of the heart in a 58-year-old factory worker. And from the arrow on the left to the arrow on the right was a 20% improvement. Now we're looking at a 54-year-old security guard, the right coronary artery. And from the arrow on the left to the arrow on the right, that is a 30% improvement. Now, this is Joe Crow in the first chapter in my book. He's a surgical colleague and a friend. In 1996, at age 44, he began getting chest pain. Cholesterol was 156, not diabetic, not hypertensive, exercised regularly, no family history. Cardiology worked him up in October of 1996, could find nothing wrong. And a month later, he finished his surgical schedule, sat down to write postoperative orders. Boom, the elephant was on his chest, pain in his left jaw, shoulder, arm. Having a heart attack, whipped to the cath lab, start the catheterization, cardiac arrest, resuscitate, finish the catheterization, one more cardiac arrest, resuscitate, stabilized, and then 3 days later, he was able to be discharged, but very depressed. He was very depressed because at the time of his angiogram, you can see that the lower end of his left anterior descending, the widowmaker, was all moth-eaten and diseased over too long a segment. You just can't ram in stent after stent after stent. And it was too far down the artery to have a bypass. So he was very depressed. Ann and I had Joe and his wife out for dinner 2 weeks after his heart attack. Joe, come on, you've been eating a horrible Western diet. You got the typical Western disease. We've got 10 years of data. Why don't you think about going plant-based? And he said, well, they couldn't offer me anything else. I'll give it a shot, but I'm not going to take those statin drugs. Fine. Well, he became the absolute personification of commitment to plant-based nutrition. And over the next 2.5 years, his total cholesterol plummeted and his LDL went from 98 to 38. And then 2.5 years after his first angiogram, he had another. And at noontime on the day that I knew he had it, I went over and walked into his office and I said, Joe, any chance I can see how this worked out? He said, yeah, I think we're doing okay. And it was really quite exciting because here we were with complete restoration of that. And there's no question that when the patient is young, when the plaque is young and made up of fat and inflammation and cholesterol, the body can do a remarkable job of reversing it. However, when the plaque has been there for decades and it's made up of fibrosis and scar and calcification, the likelihood of it going away is rather modest. But it's going to be my job tonight to show you how even those senior patients who have a plaque that won't go away, how they can get back to full activity of daily living without restriction. Now, here is really a sad story, but at the same time, a wonderful story. You can see on the left, in July of 2017, this remarkable young 45-year-old in Florida had a heart attack. And the arrow is pointing to the 80% blockage of his circumflex artery, which was part of a number of blockage, which led his cardiologist to advise that he have bypass surgery. However, he said, no, I don't want to have that. I want to try to follow a diet. He said, I found a book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, and I'm going to follow it. And the cardiologist said, that's silly. Don't you ever do it. That's not going to work. But the patient prevailed. And a year later, they had another angiogram. And you can see that was 80% blockage on the original is now 40%. So the patient persisted with this diet and changed cardiologists. And the new one, actually a year and a half later, after the second angiogram, had another one. And now the disease was gone. And the reason I found out about it was that after that third and last angiogram that had turned to normal, the patient wrote me and thanked me for writing the book. But the point I think to be made here is, when you see this, why isn't it that at least every patient with cardiovascular disease be made aware of this option, which is so simple, so safe, so inexpensive, and it endures and makes all of the arteries. It's not exclusive to the coronary artery to the heart. It positively affects the artery to the brain, the legs, the kidney, throughout the body. All right. Now, for this original study, there were 18 patients who stayed with us the whole 12 years. But what I wanted to know was, in the 8 years prior to coming into our study, how many cardiac events did these patients who were under the care of expert cardiologists have? And they had, as you can see, 49 coronary events in the categories that I've described here. But once they came into our study over the next 12 years, 17 of those 18 had no further events. However, one little sheep at 6 years wandered from the flock, got into the glazed donuts, French fries, and ended up with more angina, had to have a bypass, but proves the point. Actually, he's back with the flock, but he's proved the point that I was trying to make tonight. So we did a second study. Why? Because as excited as I was about the results we had with that small group, they were all over us for saying, Dr. Esselstyn, that's a small study. It's not prospective. It's not randomized. Your diet is very strict, severe, and draconian. What makes you think that you could ever do this with a larger group and get similar results? So we did. This time it was not 18 patients, it was 200. 2 were lost to follow-up. And how do we get these patients to comply? Because when we last wrote up this group was in July of 2014, published in the Journal of Family Practice. And look here, and those that were adherent, 89.3%, almost 90%. If you're going to have a patient make a lifestyle change this significant, you've got to show them respect. The only way I know to show respect is to give them a patient our time. So what we have, the present arrangement we've been using, since especially with virtual, anybody who signs up for our monthly seminar, I personally insist on calling them at home beforehand so that I can get my arms around their story. And at the same time, give them an opportunity to ask questions of me so that coming to the seminar, we have a strong platform from which we can all move forward. And although the seminar is a single day, it's 5.5 to 6 hours where they're going to learn all about how they have created their disease and precisely how we are going to empower them as the locus of control to halt and reverse their disease. And here, this middle figure is kind of exciting because 27 of the folks that saw us had been told they had to have bypass or stents, and they never had to have it when they went 100% plant-based. So the results of those who were adherent, we had one patient who misbehaved in China, had a small stroke, and the 21 patients who were not adherent, 62% of them had disease progression. So this is comparing our results with some of the best known results that I can find in cardiology. And if you will start at the box on your lower right, that's the Mediterranean diet from the Lyon Diet Heart Study. At the end of 4 years, 25% of those patients had either heart attack, stroke, or death. The middle one is New York City's Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, the Natural History of Coronary Disease, 20% at 4 years, heart attack, stroke, and death. And then Bill Bowden's Courage study, 19%. Now look, here we are on the far left. 0.6%. That's over a 30-fold difference. Why is our approach so different? Why are our results so different? Our results are different because we are treating the causation of the illness. With all due respect to my cardiovascular colleagues, ever since the days of Hippocrates, there's been a basic covenant of trust between the caregiver and the patient that whenever possible, the caregiver will share with the patient what is the causation of the illness. And sadly today, in cardiovascular medicine, that's not being done. Now, there's a small study of 3 patients. What right did I have to write up 3 patients? Well, to me, they all personified really the downfall of present day cardiovascular medicine. This first, which would be interesting, would and I'll just save time, but I will skip the other two. But Bob Mercer is a wonderful gentleman from Newfoundland, Canada. And at age 44, he had a complete blockage of his right right carotid artery to his brain, had a small stroke from which he recovered, but at the same time had such severe angina, they found a courageous surgeon in Toronto would operate on him, even though he had one completely occluded carotid to his brain. And he did well. He did fine after that operation till he was 69. Now he was in trouble. He had gained 40 pounds. He was diabetic. He had this severe angina again. He had erectile dysfunction. And when they looked at his one remaining carotid, it was now 90% blocked. Of all things to have happened at this time, his 37-year-old daughter came down with a heart attack. And during her convalescence, she found a book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And she said to her father, "Pop, we got to do this together." They did. That's when I first heard of Bob Mercer, when he wrote me a letter saying, "Dr. Esselstyn, I wanted to thank you for writing the book. All of my angina is gone. I've lost 40 pounds. My diabetes is gone. My erectile dysfunction is gone. And my one remaining carotid artery, which was 90% blocked, is now 67% blocked." Pretty exciting stuff. Here's a picture of Bob Mercer. In the interest of time, I'm just going to scoot through these two, but they're also, here we have on the left, you can see the pulse volume of, okay, yeah, bring it home. Here is the pulse volume of a, let me ask Tracy and John, have I got a few more minutes?
I think you're fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Sorry, I was mute. Absolutely.
Although we're both very busy. All right.
On the left, you see a pulse volume at the ankle of a 52-year-old gentleman who had to stop and pause while crossing the skyway to my office 5 times because of a partially blocked artery in his leg. But I was so focused on his heart, I totally forgot about his leg. 10 months later, he said, "Dr. Esselstyn, I want you to know that you may recall when I first started seeing you, I had to stop 5 times crossing the skyway to your office." But he said, in the last 2 months, I don't stop. The pain is gone. I said, "Well, Bond, back you go to the vascular lab." And there you are. Bingo. You can see on the right, the pulse volume is now double what it was. Now, this was within 15 months of starting our first study. We absolutely suddenly had irrefutable, rock solid, undeniable scientific proof that food and food alone could reverse vascular disease. And somebody's going to say, "What about the statins?" Well, this is 1986. We didn't have any statins. Okay. Here's another patient. This was a 78-year-old retired high school chemistry teacher. And in his retirement, he and his wife enjoyed entering square dance contests. But it was during the fast one that he was getting bilateral calf pain because of these blockages that you see from the images taken by these vascular surgeons that he saw. He was not enamored with the magnitude of the operation they had proposed. He found out about our program, came for counseling, and said to me, "Dr. Esselstyn, if I choose your method, how long will it take to get rid of my calf pain?" So I looked at him with great wisdom in my face. And I said, probably about 10 or 11 months. 3 months later, I got a phone call. "Dr. Esselstyn, you do not speak the truth. The pain is gone." Now, I don't know where every one of you who might be listening tonight lives, but here in Cleveland, when you're watching a sporting event or a mystery, you will hear just before the advertisement come on, the mellifluous tones of the announcer say something like, "When the moment is right, will you be ready?" Now, we all know that the penile artery is really quite tiny compared to the coronary artery. But often before somebody comes down with heart disease, they may find they're no longer able to raise the flag. However, all is not lost, not infrequently. 10 or 11 months after I've counseled somebody, I'll get a phone call. "Dr. Esselstyn, yes, this is Mr. So-and-so." Sure enough. Yeah, Doc, I really thought I ought to call you because recently something has come up, and I'm wondering if I don't owe you another check. Now, wrapping it up here, I wanted to finish. I promised you tonight that I would share with you how it is that somebody who is an older, who's had a plaque that has been there for decades, made up of fibrosis and scar and calcification, not going to go away. And suddenly we see that that will improve. Now, let's explain this. On the left, you are looking at a PET rubidium dipyridamole, that is a PET scan. You're looking at a PET scan, and if the image of the heart is orange or yellow, that's good. But as you can see on the left, there's this patch of green, and that green is ischemic, meaning it's getting poor blood supply. I counseled him at the same day we had that scan, and his cholesterol, which originally had been 248, after 3 weeks, or excuse me, after 10 days, was down to 137. Then 3 weeks after his first PET scan, we repeated it. And look, the area that was green is now reperfused. What is going on here? So here is the way of explaining it. Here you see a heart, there's no muscle. What you're seeing is those three large vessels, the right coronary artery, left anterior descending, and the circumflex. And where do they go? Look, they all dive into the heart muscle where they're supposed to deliver the oxygen and nutrients. So this got me to thinking, and I called Rodriguez, who is the director of the Cleveland Clinic cardiovascular pathology section, and he dissects about 200 hearts a year from the deceased. And I said, Rod, how often do you ever see coronary artery blockage or plaque once the artery has dived into the heart muscle? His answer, never. Well, now I think we had this understood, because here's what's happening. When we first see these patients, their endothelial cells are so beaten down, they're barely making any nitric oxide, the vasodilator. But believe it or not, the endothelial cell has now become your enemy. It is making two molecules, endothelin and thromboxane, which are vasoconstrictors. So as you look at this slide, think of it, all those thousands and thousands of interdigitating blood vessels intramuscularly are vasoconstricted, not with a blockage, but they're just pinched, they're squeezed because of endothelin and thromboxane. So as soon as these patients stop injury to the endothelial cell, it makes more nitric oxide. And at the same time, it stops making the endothelin and thromboxane. So you get a dilatation of that enormous number of intramuscular blood vessels. And if you think back to Poiseuille's law of flow through the hollow viscus is related to the fourth power of the radius. Translation, a tiny increase in diameter, an enormous increase in flow, which explains why those patients get better. Pretty exciting stuff. Now, just summarizing quickly, the 8 measures of disease reversal. We've seen disease reversal on the angiogram, reversal on the stress test, reversal on the PET scan. We've seen a reversal on the carotid artery, pulse volume we've shown you, and of course the 3 symptoms of angina, claudication, and erectile dysfunction. And for those of you who don't get to Cleveland very often, I always like to show you the 8th floor of the Crile building where I worked for many years as a surgeon. Of course, I wanted to show it to you how it looks in February. And now that I've retired from surgery and I work at the Wellness Institute, the morale, though the budget may be more modest, but the morale is quite high. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Esselstyn. We so appreciate you sharing all of your expertise and knowledge with us tonight. We feel very lucky. We did anticipate a lot of questions tonight because some were already submitted ahead of time, and there are quite a few in the chat. So we may not get to our recipe share tonight or to our announcements, but rest assured we'll get you that information in our newsletter this week. And then also it's always going to be posted on the hub. So we'll put that link in the chat so you guys can get any information that we can't get out tonight to you that way. I'm going to turn things over to John Fitzgerald, our coach, who's going to start the question and answer session.
All right. Hi, Dr. Esselstyn. How are you?
Hey, John,
Good to see you.
are you in an area where it's cold or where it's warm?
I'm as cold as you are right now.
We all are.
Yeah, we all are. Okay, so we'll start off with the first question. So can type 1 and type 2 diabetes be prevented or reversed?
Certainly, in patients who have type 2 diabetes, you often can see that reverse when patients will lose weight and they metabolize the fat out of their muscle cells. Once the fat is metabolized out of their muscle cells, if they have enough insulin remaining, then the insulin can escort the glucose into the muscle cell to be metabolized. Now, as far as type 1 will never be reversed because those patients are absolutely totally out of insulin. Now, you can make their insulin requirements often reduced by tightening up the loose ends, but it would be unfair to say that you could reverse type 1.
All right, great. And what are your thoughts on treating high triglycerides and Hashimoto's thyroiditis with a plant-based diet? Are carbs from fruit or any kind of fruit harmful for either one?
Yeah, no, let's start with Hashimoto's now. When I was involved with taking care of patients with thyroid disease or hypothyroidism, you could keep the Hashimoto's from growing if you replace that with something like Synthroid, which, although Synthroid, because of the way the name is configured, synthetic Synthroid, it is absolutely precisely the same molecule that your body and mine and everybody else's is making. So people should be reassured if they're taking Synthroid that they're not taking some sort of foreign substance that is going to give them some hideous side effect. It's exactly the same molecule that their bodies are making. And the other question was
about the triglycerides.
Now, triglycerides usually are a reflection of simple carbohydrates. If you're getting into juices, far too much fruit, if you're taking white bread, white rice, candies, cakes, pies, cookies, and I've found that in those persons who take smoothies, sometimes they can sneak in an awful lot of fruit, and when you beat up the fruit, now you suddenly have separated all the fructose from the fiber. So I mean, when you're eating an orange or an apple, banana, it's so safe because the fructose is bound to the fiber. But once you beat it all up in a smoothie, and now you separate the fructose from the fiber, it goes off like a rocket in your stomach, injures the liver glycase protein, and especially injures endothelial cells.
All right, great. Someone would like to know, why do you think protein is synonymous with meat? Does meat and dairy give us anything special, nutritional wise, that we can't get from a plant-based diet?
Yeah, it can give you disease.
I kind of knew you were headed there. That felt like a softball to you.
John, I just want to jump in with something from the chat because it kind of linked into the questions you were asking earlier. This person wants to know if there's any research on how plant-based diets affect neurological issues and very specifically seizures.
You know, there probably is, but for me to tell you that it's at the tip of my tongue for you tonight, I think that would be unfair. However, we do know that back in the, the early 1920s, that the ketogenic diet with ketosis was shown to help those persons who were having seizures.
Keto doesn't have to be meat-based.
Right. Courtney, did you have another one, or you want me to go?
There's a couple more in the chat, and I do kind of want to get to those because I know they're these people are actually present. So Another one was, all of your talk about heart disease, is this only caused by diet or food intake, or are there other things that might cause this problem with the endothelium? In other words, will plant-based diet alone prevent this from happening?
Yeah, what I tried to do, and I apologize, I went by it pretty fast. What are the foods that every time they pass our lips, we injure the endothelial cells? Ready? Any drop of oil: olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil, oil in a cracker, oil in a piece of bread, oil in a salad dressing. Oil injures endothelial cells, as does anything with a mother or a face: meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey. And I'll put in eggs there, though I think I may get a response from a face in that. And also we want to be sure that we avoid milk, dairy, milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, and yogurt. And I don't like sugary drinks, Diet Colas, Pepsi, and Coke. And we want to avoid cakes, pies, cookies, stevia, agave, excesses of maple syrup, molasses, and honey. I don't like nuts, peanut butter, nut butters, cashew sauce, or avocado. And those are the ones that we find that, those are the ones that when we get patients to get rid of that, they stop any further injury to the endothelial cell. Remember, that's the key. You get the healthy endothelial cell, then you get the nitric oxide, which is the molecule of gas that protects us all.
So this kind of goes along, if you're taking the nut butters and the oils, this person wants to know suggestions to enliven their salads or vegetables. If you struggle with acid reflux and can't tolerate vinegars, John so nicely suggested oil-free hummus as a possibility.
Yeah, well, that's fine. But as far as the vinegars, I don't want you to drench it. I just said this is just several drops. And that should be enough of the acetic acid, because we want to try to reboot the whole idea of the nitric oxide synthase, which is the enzyme responsible for, within the endothelial cell, responsible for making nitric oxide. But I have with me, if you want to hear from the masters of what to do with your salads.
We'll come in a minute, but I think you should also respond to acid reflux is an interesting thing that she's asking about, and people who want a plant-based diet, I think you can respond to that in a great way.
What we usually suggest is you do not injure your esophagus with acid reflux when you're sitting upright or when you're standing most of the day. It's when you're lying down, if you have an incompetent gastroesophageal sphincter, that then gastric acid, being liquid, can roll up into your lower esophagus and burn it. So what we used to always do in general surgery, when spare these patients having any operation, is so you get 6-inch blocks under the head of the bed so that you're sleeping on a slant. You're sleeping on a slant, and that way you cannot have gastric reflux. And that usually is very curative and spares the patient having to take a lot of medication against their natural acidity.
And plant-based diet.
With plant-based nutrition, yeah, obviously.
So I'm going to go back to you, John. I think there was a question about how long it takes to halt or reverse this, but I think you addressed that then in your talk. You said about 10 months, but it only took 3 months, right?
No, I remember, no, if you were watching, the earliest was what? 3 weeks. Remember?
Oh.
Yeah, remember I showed you how the green was gone? The green patch was gone when we repeated the PET scan? And what are the greens I'm talking about? They are bok choy, Swiss chard, kale, collard green, beet greens, mustard green, turnip greens, Napa cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cilantro, parsley, spinach, and arugula and asparagus. And the top 5 are kale, Swiss chard, spinach, arugula, beet greens, and beets. And look what it does for your memory.
Why are they the top 5?
Because they have the highest likelihood of giving us the nitrate.
I told you Dr. Esselstyn was the original gangster. With that rap?
Sorry, John.
All right, so I'm going to ask this question, then unfortunately I have to take off. But Dr. Esselstyn, this is a great question that I know you get asked quite a bit probably is, why isn't, this is actually a combination of two questions. Why isn't this information out there in the general public more than it is? Why is it so hard to find evidence of the benefits of a plant-based diet? And why aren't there more doctors prescribing it?
Well, for years, I resisted what I'm about to say. But how much do you suppose you're compensated for a stent or a bypass when you're, or compared to just talking to somebody about Brussels sprouts and broccoli?
Yeah, exactly.
Five years ago, I was invited by the American College of Cardiology to become a member. They wanted me to join their nutrition committee. And what is one of the major jobs of the nutrition committee? To try to educate cardiologists about the disease that they have been designated to treat. But I can share with you, it's a little bit like turning the Queen Mary, but I'm an eternal optimist, and I truly believe that we do have a seismic revolution in health in front of us. And that is going to come about when we in the profession have the will and the grit and the determination to share with the public what is the lifestyle, and most specifically, what is the nutritional literacy that will empower them to absolutely annihilate chronic illness.
Dr. Esselstyn, we can't thank you enough for your wisdom, your enthusiasm, your memory. You're making me feel old, all those things. Thank you so much. It's incredibly helpful, and it is shocking when you see the simplicity of it and you realize just how much interference and obfuscation has been put in the way of these very simple and elegant answers that you put together. So we thank you so much.